Alright, so what I'm going to show you is kind of a basic way to do custom animations. In this case, what I'm going to do is actually export out the walk cycle for the commando, kind of edit it in Maya, and then bring it back in and show you how to replace an animation in the blend space and in the animation blueprint. So, in this case, we're like, okay, we want the commando. You're going to find it, you open it up. You're going to see it's going to be using a Shadowhawk because, I don't know, all the Shadowhawk stuff is the baseline. If you want to see what it looks like, you just change your preview. It's commando. Alright, so here's what we're going to be looking at. And this is what we're going to be looking to replace. Or, in this case, edit. But you can replace it. Changing any animations for completely custom ones works the same way. If you're doing animations, you want to kind of stay within the framework of vanilla. I generally try to stay in the same frame timing. So in this case, this animation is 60 frames long. So I would try to keep it at 60 frames long. But you can do 100 frame animations. It probably won't utilize them all because of the way the blueprints and stuff work. So, anywho. So let's say you're trying to alter the commando. You want to give them, I don't know, a goose step or something stupid. You would go and find his animation. I'm going to go ahead and pause it. I haven't noticed, I don't think it matters what frame you're exporting from. I changed my preview because if you don't, when you export the animation, you will get the Shadowhawk. And it will look just as stupid. It'll make it really hard to tell what's going on. It's just not worth the effort. Anyway, you go to Asset, Export to FBX, Animation Data. In this case, as you've seen, I've exported out already just to double check stuff. I'll replace it. Apparently, UE4 uses FBX 2018. So previously I was using 2013, but I've changed to utilizing the Export 2018 version. And then you're going to want Export Preview Mesh marked, because if you don't, you'll just get skeleton data, which is fine. It's just kind of hard to work with sometimes. You don't need anything else, just Preview Mesh, export it out. Then head over to, in my case, Maya. If you're using Blender, I don't know. You probably can still figure the same stuff out. Gonna go ahead and import that in. Alright, and now we have our animation in. So in this case, I kept the root motion in, so there's a couple of trains of thought for animations. You'll have an animation that has a root motion where the root bone stays at the 0, 0, 0, or the center space, down here on the grid. And then you've got traditional animations where you actually do the movement, and then when you import it in, you'll actually tell it to block its root motion. I'm not sure which one they use, but considering it's got root motion here, I'm just going to leave it with it. So, before you animate, especially if you're using an SKM, if you were creating completely custom animation, you would just bring in an SKM. So regular, bog standard SKM and set it up that way. Actually, I should probably show you that real quick, just to make sure you see. So let's go import, let's go find a commando. My old ass files here. Alright, so commando, nothing special in the imports. There's no animations to import, just regular bog standard SKM. Just sitting here ready to go. I'm going to hit this little button up here so I can see my joints and bones. Now, when you export an SKM out of the editor, it tends to group them, at least as far as Maya sees it. I don't know if Blender's different. What I'll usually do is ungroup it. All that does is make it easier. I mean, it's still, it's still rigged up like that, so it doesn't change anything on the rigging. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer from selected, and I'm going to set it to a reference. That way I can't select the geometry, it's just there. I see it, but that's it. And then whenever you're ready to do stuff, for Maya, what you would want to do is you would want to set your frame pacing. That would be your slider down here. In this case, this little section here is how long my animation plays, and this to the right is how long or how many frames I can see out. I usually just set them the same because it doesn't matter. So let's say 60. I'll set this one to 60. So now, as I slide along, 60 frames, and you want your graph editor in, because that's how you can kind of, the graph editor is sort of the representation per bone and per transform. So for instance, if you moved the root but you didn't move anything else, you would just see the keyframes on the root. And so let's say if you wanted to move the whole root to one way and you wanted to rotate a different bone, you could actually do that using the graph editor a little easier. Again, there's 1,000 ways to animate. It depends on what you want to do. Alright, so usually the first thing I do is I will actually select all the skeleton, make sure I get every bone in, and I will set a keyframe. And you'll see here, you'll also see I've got auto key set on down here. That way anytime I move anything along the frames, it keyframes it to that. But that way I've got a baseline for every single bone if I ever want to default it back. So then I could do, let's say I'm going to move the pelvis forward. Actually, we'll move up 10 frames, move the pelvis forward, and now we've got frame 10 to key forward, and everything carries over. Now this is, like I said, this is the non-control rig way of doing it. It's a little more tedious, but setting up control rigs takes forever, and I don't do it unless I really, really have to. This works well enough for me. It can be fiddly because, like, for instance, there's no IK. So if I move the pelvis down, the legs keep going with it. So with a control rig, you would have IK and all this other kind of stuff that would make the motion more natural. But in this case, like I said, I'm not worried about it. Anywho, but that's what you would do for that kind of stuff. So it's maybe I want actually, that's a good example here. So if you see, I've got my pelvis moved forward on frame 10. So I've got a keyframe here for the frame. You can see in the graph editor, it does its, linear interpretation or whatever of the motion. But if I go to hip right, you'll notice there's nothing here. There's no keyframe. That's because its position didn't change. So for instance, if I moved it to rotate out at frame 10, now I've got a key, and I've got all that good stuff, and I go back, you'll notice that there's no time break. So it doesn't set it when you do that. So for instance, if I wanted to go to frame 5 and then have the leg start going up, I would actually need to copy the frame at frame 0 and paste that in. Oh, that was a pelvis. Well, let's there we go. Yep. I would go copy frame 0, paste it down at frame 5, and now everything moves forward until frame 5, and then the hip goes out. So you want to think about that kind of stuff when you're animating. It's kind of the fiddly nature of it. You want to think through it. So if I were doing a walk cycle, I would actually do what I just showed you. I would move the pelvis. So if I say, okay, he's going to step to the end of this grid, so I would move him to the end of the grid, and that would be the root motion. And then I would do one leg at a time, or body motion. So you do the big movements first through the course of the animation, then you go back through and kind of touch up your, maybe there's a little jitter in the leg, or maybe the hips kind of, drop out, whatever it happens to be. But that is the absolute basics of animation. It's not complicated. It's going to be different depending on software. It's going to be different depending on what your goal is with it. But it can be as good or bad as you want it to be. You can still bring it into the editor and use it. So it's a good framework to kind of get started. I'll probably do a better animation thing later. Like I said, I'm not an animator. I'm not a rigger. I just throw things together, and eventually it kind of comes and works out. But I'd still do one just to kind of help out. Alright, let's get back to the editor and animation. So let me clear this out. Let me get our walk cycle back in. Alright, now we got our Y cycle back in. Gonna show that. I'm going to set the mesh back to a reference. Alright. Now I've got the animation set. Now, dealing with an animation, so let's say you want to modify this. It's going to work basically the same because from your perspective here, you have access to the entire animation. This is as if you opened up your own animation. The only difference is you don't see the keyframes. It should still work all right. I can even double check just to make sure, but generally things are going to work all right. Yeah, so you know, you see there's a key on every single frame. So whenever you finish an animation, you cook the animation out. It'll actually key every single frame. That can be kind of a pain in the ass to deal with, depending on the length of the animation. However, that does mean it's relatively easy to go back through and kind of edit things the way you want. So in this case, we're gonna, you know, make him kick his right leg up at, let's say, we'll say frame 20. His leg is gonna be like way up in the air. So we're gonna grab his hip joint, kick his leg way up in the air, and you'll see, you know, graph editor changes, keyframes are all still there. So now, the difference is, because it's got every frame, it's just going to throw the leg up. This is where there's a way to do it. I don't remember exactly how, but there's some way you can actually transfer this back down. So it's still, there's still keyframes in major sections, but not every frame. If you're doing it custom, you know, it's much easier to work with. If you're modifying one, you're going to have to go through and say, well, what do I want to change, and see if there's a way you can actually alter that frame by frame, or even look at some of the other options. But let's say, you know, I want his leg all the way up on frame 20, 21, 2, 3, all the way to 25. Alright, so he's walking along, his leg's up, and then it's back down. Easy peasy, just a slight change, slight modification. Now we're going to select off of that. So now when you're exporting animations, you don't always have to export. I know I've had problems in the past sometimes where it won't let me export stuff if there's not geometry in it for some reason, but you shouldn't have to. So in this case, let's see if I can get it working right. I'm going to select your root. That's going to select everything. And we're going to go export that out. So, CMD, let's say test walk. Now you want to make sure you have your animation selected in Maya. If you don't, it won't export any of the animation data. It will just be that single thing, and it'll suck. Maya, you always want to make sure smoothing groups, that's not a reference to this, but people always forget it. And nothing else. Okay, and if you need to set your thing, your version, you do file specific options, presets, let's turn that all off. We'll go down to animation or advanced options, FBX file format 2018, and then export. Yeah, we'll see about that. I don't really modify animations much. I usually just make them from scratch. Alright, let's see if that did what we want to do. We'll close this out. So drag in CMD test walk, and it's going to be on the regular mech skeleton. Because we didn't do a custom skeleton. Now you notice that this isn't asking for any actual skeletal mesh. And it says export to time, so it's all animation stuff. So it's identifying it's an animation, which is good. Let's stretch this over a little bit. Import bone tracks, good. Don't, well, I mean, redundant keys, whatever. Nothing else, convert scene, all that stuff's normal. Alright, we'll import that. Now, let's see if that actually works. So as you can see, the animation is playing properly. He's moving forward and kicks his leg up. And we'll change over to the commando preview mesh. You can see a little easier. Okay, cool. So that works. Good to go. We'll close it out and just leave it on its regular preview mesh. Go ahead and save it. Now this is where you're going to start replacing stuff. So the way MW5 does it, and somebody will probably have a better explanation later, but basically you've got your animation blueprint, which kind of handles telling the derived mech, or whatever the import stuff is, what files to look for when determining your blend space. So a blend space, both in Unity and Unreal, is basically, I guess I could show you. It's just easier that way too. Locomotion, there we go. So if you think about this down here in the bottom middle as a, what is going on? Why is it not? Well, for whatever reason, it's not letting me actually. There we go. If you think of it like an analog, this is a system that tells the game or software what animation needs to be playing at what point in the analog. So if the analog's all the way forward, it tells you, hey, it's up here. It wants you to use the run forward straight animation. You know, and if it's, you know, on the far left side, it's just a walk forward. The middle, it's a stand, you know, not moving, that kind of stuff. So if you think of it as like an analog, these are basically just telling it what to play at those analogs. These are what you're going to replace your animations in. So in this case, let's say, well, anywho, the animation blueprint has a big list of those. So you'd see falling, locomotion. Some of these have actual animations, but most of them are blend spaces. And this is where you'll actually tell it, if you do a different blend space, this is where you'll tell it. If not, this is where you'll see which blend space you need to edit in order to, you know, bring your animation into it. We don't need to copy that one because in this case we're just modifying the walk cycle. So the only thing we need to do is save the mod for locomotion and save the mod for FP locomotion. So there's two blend space setups in MW5. You have a first person set of blend spaces and you have a third person set of blend spaces. I don't know if you've noticed before with certain mechs, their interior walk animations are significantly subdued compared to the third person for obvious reasons. You know, if the third person is bouncing all around and you're in first person, it's just not going to be a fun experience. So they bring the movements down considerably for the first person animations, and they have a whole different blend space for that. So if you make a crazy animation, you know, for like a cockpit or you know, a mech or whatever, because everything's locked to that cockpit node, you want to make sure you keep that in mind. Otherwise, when you go into first person view, you might be getting thrown all over the place. Where is our, there it is, first person, locomotion, save the mod. Alright, go to our mod override. Alright, let's open up this. So, and of course it's not showing my mouse in there again, so whatever. There we go. So, this is also where you can see if your animations are working properly. You can change your preview mesh, back to commando, where is it? There we go. You can see them walk, run. This is also how the animation, so you would make a walk animation and then a run animation. And then you would actually blend those, because if you see on the screen, you'll see the speed and the values. There's actually an animation rate scale right here. That rate scale is how fast your animation plays. So a 1.0 run is going to play the run animation at a 1.0 speed. You can also change it in here. That's what I did with the Revenant. The Revenant's got a 2.0 scale on its walk animation to make it all like jittery and shit. Alright, where's my mouse? It's a pain in the ass, it's not showing my mouse, so. Almost. There we go. Okay, so it's got a run there. Okay, so this one, the commando's got a really short distance for its walk cycle. Some of the other ones, it's a little closer to the run before it actually starts moving past the 1.0. But what you'll do, so in this case I've got the blend space open and I want to replace the original walk cycle with my dumb walk cycle. Real easy. You just right click on that dot, and then, where is it? Test walk, I think it was called. Let's CMD, there it is. And you'll actually just replace it, and now you'll get your stupid animation going. In this case, because I modified it slightly, it's kind of wonky, so it's not playing exactly like it should be. I'm not really sure why. Could be an import setting. With custom animations, you won't notice it. It'll generally work, no problem. Replacing their animations, you hit and miss. But it's that simple. And so when you save this out, put it in a mod or something, the commando would have this, dumb hitch in its walk. That's really that simple. That is exactly all it takes to make custom animations. The hardest part, making the animations. Getting them in the game, not much of an issue unless you want something custom. I haven't figured out where power down is actually called. Every mech has its own power down animations, but it's not in the blend spaces. It's not in the animation blueprint. It might be in derived mech somehow, which would be an awful place for it, but there's certain ways animations are used, or putting in custom animations for actions that are different that I haven't really figured out yet, but I don't know anything about blueprints, so a lot of it's just me kind of dabbling with stuff. Theoretically, with the blend spaces, you could actually add in a whole bunch of different animations to create the kind of movement systems, because the blend space is how you would create your movement systems you would see in something like Uncharted or Assassin's Creed, like the way the character moves, how it's kind of that like fluid shift between leaning left and leaning right, and the hips turning certain ways, or interaction between things. All of that is blending animations together, and the blend spaces can do that. But as far as basically going in and swapping animations, that's it. It's really all it takes. Make your animation, bring it into the editor, swap it out in the blend space or the animation blueprint, and you want to do it in the actual mech's animation blueprint. There's actually parent animation blueprints somewhere up here. Yeah, so this is the parent animation blueprint, but this has a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, for instance, for the quad, I duplicated this and created a modified version that adds another set of the left foot down, right foot down, all that kind of stuff, in order to create the four-legged impact and sounds. And there's probably some other cool stuff you can do in here, but obviously if you modify this, you're gonna have to create an entirely new skeleton. That's, it's something you can do, but it's a lot of work. So, anywho, let me know if you need anything else, or I'll probably do another thing later on, a little more detail in animating, trying to make things look decent.